Good morning and welcome to part 9 of our study of the book of Galatians. Now this book is really just one long letter that Paul is writing to the church of Galatia, and it's important to remember that these churches were primarily Gentile, although there were certainly some Jewish people in them, and that they were being talked to by people from Jerusalem and being told that they had to revert to the law of Judaism as well as faith in Christ. And this was what Paul was trying to teach against, that it was not necessary to follow the law, that it was only necessary to have faith in Christ and his resurrection and to believe firmly in that event. And so Paul continues on his message, and he has called the Galatians fools, he's called them brethren. He's criticized them, he's been angry at them, he's cajoled them, and he continues on in that vein, and now he will call them little children. But then he says, continuing in chapter 4, starting in verse 12, "Brethren, I urge you to become like me." Now, what he means by this is that he was once a member of the Jewish community who followed the law faithfully. And if you go to Philippians chapter 3, he says this, "If anyone else thinks he may have confidence in the flesh, I more so. Circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, concerning the law a Pharisee, concerning zeal, persecuting the church, concerning the righteousness which is in the law, blameless." So he knew what it was like to be under the law. And now he was saying, "Brethren, I urge you to become like me, free from the law, and having faith only in the sacrifice of Christ." And then he says, "But for I became like you," in the sense that he now accepted Gentiles. It was considered wrong for Jewish people to associate with Gentiles, to go to their home, to eat with them, to associate with them, to follow any of the Gentile customs. Paul says, "I became like you because now I associate with Gentiles. I do not follow the laws. I take Jewish and Gentile food. I do not follow the feast days. So I became more like you. I became more like a Gentile in many ways as far as legalism was concerned." And he says, "I urge you to become like me, free from the law, because I also became somewhat like you." And although there was some concern, because the Gentile people and the people in the Galatian churches were refuting now this teaching of Paul, and were going back to the law, he says, "I have not been injured. You have not injured me at all. You have not insulted me. You have not made me angry at this fact. I accept that what you've done. You haven't injured me, but I want you to become more free like myself, because I also accepted some of your customs and some of your concerns and your law and your systems. So I urge you to become like me, for I became like you and have not injured me at all. You know that because of physical infirmity, I preached the gospel to you at the first." Now he came to them before, although he's writing a letter to them now. He had initially come to them and had preached the gospel. Now, we don't know what this physical infirmity he's referring to really is. There's conjecture that he was in some way physically disabled, that he had some problems with his eyes probably, that he had some chronic infection in his eyes, that he may have had some seizure disorder, that he may have had some chronic illness because he had initially been in a low-lying, marshy or more damp area of this country before he came to the higher altitude of the churches in Galatia. So there was some concern that he may have had malaria or something along that line, but it's all conjecture. No one really knows for sure, but he had something that was physically disabling. We do know that he was not a man of great stature. He was not an imposing figure. He was not someone who drew your attention physically. He was actually apparently fairly homely and not attractive looking at all. But he did have something. He had a great faith in Christ, and he had a type of personality which apparently drew people to him because of his unyielding belief and concern for them. And this is what he's saying here. I came to you, I preached the gospel to you at the first, and I knew that because of physical infirmity, I preached the gospel to you. So maybe he came to Galatia initially because of his physical disability and stayed there and preached to them. And he said, and my trial which was in my flesh you did not despise or reject. So even though he was not physically attractive, even though he did not impress upon people by his physical appearance, even though he may have had some disfiguring ailment, such as a chronic eye condition or some kind of chronic medical condition which would reject people or make people reject him, he said they did not do this to him. Despite my physical appearance, in spite of my trial in my flesh, as he puts it, you did not despise or reject me, but you received me as an angel of God, or even as Jesus Christ himself. In other words, he was fully respected, and he was accepted by the Galatians, by many of them at least, in this regard, because they figured that he was a messenger from God himself when he spoke to them. And what then was a blessing you enjoyed? If you accepted me, and if you accepted my word, did you not have a blessing? Did you not have the blessing from this? Because he said, what was the blessing you then enjoyed as a result of this? For I bear you witness that if possible, you would have plucked out your own eyes and given them to me. This is how he felt that the Galatians received him. They accepted him. The people that he spoke to accepted him and had received him with such fervor and with such overwhelming acceptance that he felt that if they could help him in some way, they would have. If they thought that they could help him by plucking out their own eyes to give to him, they apparently would have. So this is how he felt that they received his message and they received him. But then he says, have I now become your enemy because I tell you the truth? And this reflects even today, because many people who tell the truth are received as somewhat of an annoyance or an enemy or in some way wrong. If you don't go along with what the world thinks, if you don't go along with what people as a whole think, they look upon you as some kind of an outcast or as an enemy. And this is the way Paul was now feeling, because the people he had once preached to and he had once seen accept the gospel that he preached, the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ as being the only way to salvation and the only way to really be accepted by God. He preached this, the people accepted it, but now they were starting to reject this in the sense they were going back to the law, and now they were sort of treating Paul as being the outcast or the enemy. And he said, have I now become your enemy because I tell you the truth? This is what sometimes happens. If you look at Proverbs 27, it sort of refers to this, because it says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. So when a person is accepted and a person says something which is accepted, it seems that they are faithful. And people accept them as being faithful, but when they turn against them, then they turn them on as if they're being deceitful. And people who give the wrong message can be deceitful, even though they appear to flatter you or to promote you. We talked about this somewhat in Ecclesiastes when we did the study there, but people being deceitful and flattering beyond what is required. So therefore, Paul goes on to say, they zealously court you, but for no good. Yes, they want to exclude you, that you may be zealous for them. In other words, they want to lead you in, take you in, so that you will feel that you are wanted by them, and you are required by them, and you are needed by them, and that they have the only way for you to really live. But when they get you, when they incorporate you into their group or into their teaching, then they really exclude you from anybody else. This is the way often cults work, because they lure people in by making them promises and flattering them and encouraging them in what they feel they themselves need. So they give them what they want, they encourage them, they flatter them to get them into their group. But once there, then they're excluded from anything else. Many cults try to separate people from their families, from their friends, from their previous life altogether. And this is something which has to be watched for, because if a group, anybody, tries to exclude you from your past by force or by coercion, this is not something that should be allowed. And this is what he's saying. They try to impress upon you that they have a great zeal for you. But once they get you in, then they want to exclude you, only that you may have a zeal for what they're teaching and nothing else. But Paul says, but it is good to be zealous in a good thing always, and not only when I am present with you, to be zealous for what is really right and what is really good all the time, not just when the teacher is there for you, not just when the pastor is there for you, all the time. He says, my little children, for whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you, I would like to be present with you now and to change my tone, for I have doubts about you. He feels that his work among the Galatians was equivalent to a mother giving birth. He labored that firmly and that strongly. And it was like a mother giving birth. The pain he felt for the Galatians, the ardor he felt for them, the hope he felt for them, was like the same as a mother giving birth to a child. And now he feels, because they are slipping away, they're going back to the Judaic system. And even the Gentiles who were there were being told they had to become Jews, follow the Jewish laws first. Because they were going back to that, he felt he must almost have to do it again. Whom I labor in birth again until Christ is formed in you. He wished you were present so that he could understand, that they could understand that what he's saying in this letter is not one of anger, not one of animosity. What he's saying is the fact that he's saying the truth. And sometimes in a letter it's hard to imply the tone. It's hard to give the actual tone, because your body language, your inflections, everything is different in a letter than it is when it's spoken. And he says he wished he could be there with them again, so that he could change the tone that seems to be implied, so that he could put his own feeling, his own impression, his own inflection into what he's saying. So he's saying this because he really fears for the Galatian church. So he is again emphasizing the need to have faith in Christ and to avoid the law. And there are some impressions in this which we should learn of and deal with today, because this shows some principles, and it shows some principles of the attitude of us towards the preacher or someone who's preaching to us, and the attitude of what a preacher must be towards the people he is teaching. And this is summed up in a commentary by David Guzik in this way. He says that there shows the attitude, the principles of the attitude for people in the church towards their pastor should be, their attitude must not be determined by his personal appearance or personality. Paul was not a big person or an impressive person physically, so his appearance would not be one that would attract people, but his personality, his force, his zeal for what he was speaking did. And the attitude must be not determined by his personality or physical appearance. It must not be determined by the whims of the people to whom he's speaking. The people who are listening must listen to what the pastor's saying and must understand and learn for themselves some of the truths that are involved in the gospel message. In the message. So their attitude must not be determined by his personality or his appearance, nor by their own whims of theology. Their attitude should be determined by the pastor's loyalty to the apostolic message in the Bible, what the Bible preaches. And this is the main attitude that the congregants, that the people listening, should take towards the teacher. But the section of the pastor towards the people must also be considered. And this shows that the pastor must be willing to serve and sacrifice for his people. Paul did that. Paul showed his sacrifice, that he labored for them, that he, even with physical disabilities, he appeared to them and gave them the message. He must be willing to serve and sacrifice for the people. He must continually tell them the truth, because only the truth sets a person really free. He must continue to say what is really required and what is the truth, not just what the people want to hear. He must love the people deeply for themselves, not for a selfish motive, not for a selfish motive for himself or herself. You see pastors who make large amounts of money and income from their congregants and from the people who listen to them. This is not always altogether wrong as long as the money is in a moderate amount, but there are massive amounts of people who take from the congregants for their own personal benefit and not for the benefit of the church or for the congregants themselves. So the pastor should love the people deeply and not for himself. He must have zeal for what is right, not just promote good things haphazardly or lacklusterly, but must have a zeal for what is right. And he must desire to form Jesus in them, not to form a cult around him or herself. This is a big thing, because it is Jesus that you're talking about, not the person giving the speaking. So these are the attitudes that should be taught and learned from this section of the book of Galatians. So we're going to go on and finish the last section of chapter 4 in the next lesson. Now, we may be away next week, and there may not be a lesson next Tuesday, but if not, we'll continue this the Tuesday after. So just stay tuned, and we'll see. But if there's no lesson next Tuesday, it's because we're away and not able to do this. But after that, we'll be back with the continuation of the study of the book of Galatians. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you then. Bye for now.